A new home, an old home. The last rays of the setting sun shone into the hospital room, shining its light on a Pegasus with a horn, a unicorn with wings, and a filly with a new lifespan. Sweetie Belle busied herself with the task of testing her upgraded cardiovascular system by running laps around the room and climbing over the bed. "Here are the discharge papers for Sweetie Belle," Dr. Shine said. "Her heart valve should last the rest of her life, which will be as long as either of ours, Princess willing. She did have major surgery, so she should avoid any strenuous activities or long-distance travel for at least 6 months." Twilight glanced upwards. "Like the moon?" "Especially the moon. In fact, I think she shouldn't go there for 9 months at the bare minimum." At the mention of the moon, Sweetie Belle zipped over. "We can go to the moon? What's it like? Is it cold or warm? Is it made of cheese? Can we eat it?" She punctuated each question with a bounce. Twilight stilled Sweetie by setting a forehoof on the filly's shoulder. Now, you heard the doctor. We won't be able to visit the moon before we go. I'm sorry, Sweetie. I was looking forward to it too." Sweetie peered upward. "Twilight, when are we leaving?" Twilight shuffled her hoof. "Well, there's been a slight delay, so it'll take just a little while longer to put the apparatus back together. The princess gave us a place for us to live until it's fixed, though, and I'm technically your mother now." She gave her daughter an awkward grin. Sweetie stared back. "What? How can you be my mom? Isn't my mum my mom?" "Well, yes, but some pony needs to take care of you until we go home. It's just to make the paperwork easier with us living together." Sweetie scratched her chin. "I don't have to call you Mom, do I?" "Not if you don't want to, Sweetie Belle." Twilight paused, then tousled the filly's mane. "But you still have to do what I tell you." "Before I leave you two to your familiar bonding," Dr. Shine said, levitating a pill bottle, "I have Sweetie Belle's prescription here. Her mechanical heart valve creates a risk of forming a blood clot, which could break loose and produce a stroke or heart attack. As a precaution, I've prescribed her some blood thinner to reduce her ability to form clots. Any major cuts and bruises Sweetie Belle gets will still heal on their own. It will simply take a little longer." Dr. Shine pointed at Twilight's amulet. "However, I can't recommend that she fly. Any crashes could lead to internal injuries that could be life-threatening, especially since she doesn't have the durability of an earth pony, or the natural crash avoidance or bracing instincts of a Pegasus." Twilight took the bottle with a levitation and peered at its contents. "How long will she need to take these?" "Once a day for the rest of her life, of course." Twilight pondered for a moment. "I don't think that'll be an issue, but I'll add that research to my checklist for when we go." "What?" Sweetie Belle stomped a hoof. "I have to take those dumb pills forever, and I don't even get magic wings? No moon and no wings? This future stinks." "We'll be leaving it soon, Sweetie Belle." Twilight smiled at the filly. "And Dr. Shine, thank you so much for everything you've done. I can't begin to imagine what I would have done if I had lost Sweetie Belle." "It's been no problem at all, Miss Sparkle. Come back if you need anything or if you have any questions. And have a safe trip home." "I will." Twilight walked out of the room with Sweetie Belle. The rising moon peeked over the side of Canterlot Mountain, its light illuminating a pair of unicorns walking to their new home. Sweetie Belle looked up at the stars. "So, no clouds?" Twilight looked back down at her foster child. "None in Equestria, no." "Where do the Pegasi sleep then?" "In beds like the rest of us do, I suppose." Twilight looked at the house they had arrived at. "This must be the place." Sweetie Belle looked out over the short, grassy lawn at the dark house. The moonlight reflected off the rounded white walls and its conical yellow roof. The modest residence sat at the edge of the city, away from the tall buildings of downtown. Twilight's horn illuminated briefly, and a strip of light on either side of the front walkway appeared. Another flash of a horn lit the underside of the house's overhangs. The filly trotted to the front door and pushed it open. Within, she found a furnished living area. An unlit fireplace sat against the wall, and the opposite wall was flush with books. Sweetie ran upstairs to explore. Twilight shouted after her, "Don't touch anything you don't understand." Upstairs, Sweetie Belle found a bathroom and a pair of bedrooms. She understood beds very well, so she duly complied with Twilight's instructions and began bouncing on hers. Twilight found her soon afterwards. "Sweetie Belle, we just got that bed. Please don't wear it out." "Oh." She climbed down. Twilight levitated a scroll in front of her face. "I've checked out the house, and everything appears to be in order. Princess Celestia left instructions on how to operate the appliances, as well as a full pantry and my first month's pay. As for you—" A few bits hovered over to Sweetie Belle's nightstand. "Here is your allowance for this week." Twilight produced a quill and checked off a box. Sweetie Belle looked at her money. 8, 9, 10 bits? Mum and Dad gave me 15. "Oh, they did? Here you go, 5 more bits." Twilight paid the filly. Sweetie Belle gave a giant grin and hugged Twilight's foreleg. Twilight referred to her checklist again. "Next on the list. Dinner. Of course, I'm starving. There are some cookbooks in the dining room. The princess certainly knew what I wanted in the house." She giggled. "I'm in the mood for some vegetables." Sweetie Belle sat at the table, which was made out of some dark wood she didn't know the name of. Above her hung a modest silver chandelier whose clear gems shone with some magical power. The walls were painted with a hint of yellow, with white trim and stronger yellow curtains blocking out the night. Sweetie absent-mindedly poked at the cloth placemat in front of her. It was cotton, pink with a purple edge, and had grapes on it. In the centre of the table, which was slightly too large for just 2 ponies to eat at, was a white, round mat. The whole setup was more style than her parents fed her on, but less than her sister did. It was disconcerting in its own way. Before Sweetie Belle had a chance to examine her surroundings further, Twilight Sparkle came in, levitating a bowl of fruits and steamed vegetables. She set the bowl down on the centre placemat, and a plate at their respective seats. "Here we are, Sweetie Belle. An arrangement of apricots, olives, and grapefruit, with a side of ginger root. I've never had this combination. They're not in season at the same time." Twilight closed her eyes and smiled. "But I guess with magic, they can harvest all year." "What season is it, anyways?" Sweetie asked. "It's late spring." "Oh." Sweetie had to climb halfway across the table to reach the bowl to serve her plate, while Twilight used a magic to fetch her meal. They began to eat. "You should take your hooves off the table, Sweetie Belle," Twilight instructed. The filly sat back in her chair. The pair ate in silence for a few minutes. Twilight decided to break the ice. "So, Sweetie Belle, how was your stay at the hospital?" "Oh, there was lots of magic lights and gems and stuff. Dr. Shine was nice, and yesterday they brought some dogs to cheer the patients up. That was nice too." More silence. Sweetie looked across the table. "How was your day, Twilight?" "Well, I got some of my research done, and I took a look at the apparatus that we took here. It's been damaged, so we'll be here a little while until I fix it. But we'll be home in no time. The princess has made me the High Magician, just as a way to cut the red tape between me and the research materials. But I'll be heading towards the castle tomorrow. You've been left unsupervised before, so you can take care of yourself, right?" "Oh, sure, of course, Twilight." "And you'll have plenty to read, too." Twilight smiled at the filly. Sweetie rolled her eyes. "Joy." After the two finished eating, Twilight again produced her checklist. "Next up, do the dishes. Here you go, Sweetie Belle. The bowl, plates, and silverware situated themselves in front of her. Sweetie looked at the dishes. Oh, I know. What about dessert? Twilight tilted her head. Dessert? Sweetie gestured dramatically. I mean, I was just in the hospital, fighting for my life with my heart cut open and stuff like that. She angled herself so that her stitches were plainly visible to the older mare. I think I deserve just a little dessert, right, Twilight? I didn't think of it that way. I'll see what we have. Twilight went into the kitchen. How about ice cream? She called back. Ooh, I'll take some vanilla. Twilight returned with a bowl of frozen sweetness. Here you are, Sweetie Belle. Sweetie Belle dug into the ice cream like a filly having ice cream for the first time in 3.5 centuries. She looked up. Twilight, why don't you do the dishes while I'm eating? That way we can get to bed sooner. That makes sense. Good idea, Sweetie Belle. Twilight took the dishes into the kitchen. Sweetie Belle's victory was cut short by the ice cream's freeze taking its terrible toll through her brain. A few minutes later, there was another bowl to wash. Twilight took it into the kitchen before returning. Next on tonight's list is giving a filly a bath. But Twilight... No buts. It's on the checklist. I'll get the water started. Twilight tested the bathwater with her hoof. Perfect. Get on in, Sweetie Belle. Oh no! Sweetie Belle clasped her hoof to her chest. My poor heart! She closed her eyes and staggered a step. It can't handle the idea of taking a bath. I guess I'll just have to skip it tonight. She snuck a peek at Twilight. Oh, that's too bad, sweetie. But do you know what the doctor recommended for a speedier recovery? Lots of candy? Sweetie tilted her head, staring at Twilight with a hopeful smile. Twilight Sparkle's horn illuminated. Warm water! Sweetie Belle rose into the air. The flailing of her legs was useless against the power of the mightiest unicorn in Equestria. The bathwater swirled around the filly, soaking her coat to her skin. A strange concoction entered the bath, filling it with bubbles. Sweetie supposed that she already knew what a bubble bath was, but that didn't mean she had to like it. The prisoner splashed water back at her aggressor, catching her off guard. The purple's unicorn face dripped with suds. Twilight wiped herself off. Sweetie Belle, you don't have to make this difficult. She levitated a sponge into the water and began to scrub the filly. Seeing her chance, Sweetie Belle broke free from the wicked sponge and bucked a mighty wall of water towards the purple one. Alas, it struck an invisible wall and ran back into the tub. Sweetie Belle sulked in the bubbly water, defeated. The filly made several more attempts at avoiding soap, shampoo, and overall cleanliness, but she was ultimately overcome by her far more powerful opponent. Having completed her foul work, the purple one drained the tub and magically lifted Sweetie Belle out of it. Being rubbed all over with a towel simply added insult to injury. I'm going to go take a shower myself, Sweetie Belle, so why don't you brush your teeth and get ready for bed? Sweetie Belle grumbled her way to the sink, while Twilight took her amulet off and started a much less arduous pony cleaning. The clean filly lay in her bed, looking out the window at the starry sky beyond. Twilight Sparkle entered the room with a towel wrapped around her head and another around her tail. Are you ready to go to sleep, Sweetie Belle? You've had a long day. Yeah, Sweetie Belle yawned. Twilight tucked the white filly in. Good night, then. She began to leave the room. Wait, Twilight! The mare turned around. What is it, Sweetie Belle? Can you read me a bedtime story? Twilight walked to a small bookshelf in one corner of the bedroom. Of course. Here's one. She sat by the bed, book levitating in front of her. Twilight Sparkle began to read. Once upon a time, there was a little red earth filly named Riding Hood. Now this filly lived in a village by the ever-free forest. And then the lumberjack cut the timber wolf apart, and Riding Hood and her grandmother tumbled out, and the 3 ponies buried the timber wolf in their fireplace and enjoyed the basket of sweets, and they lived happily ever after. The end. Twilight closed the book. Twilight Sparkle looked at Sweetie Belle, who was now fast asleep. She smiled. "Good night, Sweetie Belle." Twilight leaned down and kissed the base of Sweetie's horn. She slowly left the room, turning off the light as she left. The next day, Sweetie Belle awoke. She yawned and stretched her legs while her mind caught up to where she was. She wandered out of her room, finding her way downstairs to the dining. Upon the table, an unfurled scroll caught her attention. "Sweetie Belle, I'm sorry I didn't wake you up. I had to leave early for my first day as High Magician. You have the house to yourself, so try to keep it clean. Don't try to turn on the stove or the oven by yourself. There are plenty of books around the house for you to read. I've made a checklist of things you should do today. Morning. Eat your breakfast. I've written another list of potential meals and have placed it on the refrigerator. Take your heart pill. The bottle is on the counter. Brush your teeth. Comb your mane and tail." Sweetie didn't read any further. She looked up the chandelier, then around the walls for a switch to turn it on. She didn't find one. Neither did any of Twilight's notes leave instructions. Sweetie Belle scratched her head. "How do I turn on the light?" Twilight Sparkle stood at Princess Celestia's side in her throne room. Orange light filtered into the stained glass window as the sun rose. A beam of sunlight also shone straight down onto the throne. Twilight couldn't figure out what spell made it do that, but at the moment she was busy with her nose in a copy of Duration Skewing, The Long and the Short of It, one of Starswell's earlier works. "Twilight," the princess said, "we will have our first guest soon, and it is simply impolite to read while we have company." "Oh, sorry, Princess." Twilight set the book down and pushed it behind her with a hind leg. "Is the outfit necessary, though, Princess? I'm wearing more than you are." Twilight was clad in a moderately elaborate dark blue robe, lined with white stars. While it covered her cutie mark and magic wings, a pair of cloth cutie marks had been sewn into it in the appropriate places. She also wore a short, pointed hat with a wide brim. It, too, sported the star pattern. Twilight patiently waited for the first appointment of her new office. Her hat tilted forwards. She pushed it back into place. It fell forwards again. She tilted it back. It shifted again. Twilight noticed a quick yellow glow. She looked at Princess Celestia, who had suddenly become fascinated by the alternating sunbeam and starfield pattern on the ceiling. Princess Celestia's crown tilted to the side. She looked at the unicorn, who met her with a grin. Twilight's hat popped off her head, and the princess's crown tumbled backwards. Twilight's hat landed on her head again, then made its way around to her rump. Celestia's crown launched itself across the room. The throne room doors opened inches away from the golden crown. A pair of flashes instantly brought the headgear back to their rightful places, and the 2 ponies were the very image of dignity. "Ambassador Chestnut of the Donkey Kingdom is here to see you, Princess." "Send him in," Celestia replied. The door opened fully, and a donkey entered. Chestnut's mane was well groomed, and he wore a black suit with a white shirt beneath and a black tie. Ambassador Chestnut crossed the room and bowed before the princess. "Princess Celestia," he said, "it is an honor to meet you again." He turned to Twilight. "And you must be the new High Magician I've heard about. Twilight Sparkle, is it?" Twilight nodded, trying to act as formal as she could. "That's correct." "Allow me to satisfy my curiosity. I hear rumours that you are a sorceress of immense power and beauty from the distant past, struck down in a prime, and resurrected to serve the princess yet again. From your appearance, it must have been quite the prime indeed. Chestnut hooked his foreleg around Twilight's, lifting hers up. Twilight nervously glanced between him and the princess. He leaned down towards her raised hoof. Princess Celestia loudly cleared her throat. Ambassador Chestnut, I assume you have not travelled all this way from your land to court my magician. The donkey backed away from the unicorn. Of course, your highness. My apologies, High Magician Sparkle. Twilight subconsciously rubbed the front of her foreleg against the back of her other one. It's no trouble at all, Ambassador. Now, Princess Celestia started, what brings you to my castle? I have come to negotiate the sale of the experimental amulets for my homeland. I am prepared to offer 8,200 bits per unit. 820,000 bits total? That is quite a sum, Ambassador. However, as I have told your king in my letters, the amulets are not for sale. Surely granting the powers of flight and magic to more equines can only do good, Princess. Perhaps a sum of 980,000 bits would be more amenable, Your Majesty. Celestia's expression didn't waver. My answer is still no, Ambassador Chestnut. The donkey turned to Twilight. Perhaps the stunning High Magician could give her opinion. Two sets of eyes pointed at the unicorn. Twilight glanced at her mentor's face. Well, I believe that even a small number of amulets would improve donkey society more than no amulets would. Princess Celestia closed her eyes and turned away, exhaling. Twilight's ears dropped. Ambassador Chestnut moved back in front of Celestia. I see you have chosen an adviser as wise as she is beautiful. And you would be wiser still, Princess, to follow her advice. Celestia opened her eyes again. They are not for sale, and that is final, Ambassador Chestnut. You may leave us now, and I wish you a safe return to your homeland. The donkey bowed and backed away. As you wish, Princess Celestia. It was a pleasure to meet you, Magician Sparkle. He backed out of the throne room, closing the door. Twilight paused for a moment before looking up at the princess. Princess Celestia? Did I do something wrong? Princess Celestia looked back at Twilight. No, Twilight, you did not know. You see, Twilight, while the amulets work very well and are quite reliable on ponies, we have had less success adapting them to other species. While most of our efforts have gone into giving magic to the griffins, the donkey amulets have proven the easiest to develop. Even then, the amulets are unreliable and prone to failure. Twilight looked down, her mind in motion. So, if a flight or magic amulet fails... She touched a flight amulet. It could prove disastrous, or even fatal. You have nothing to worry about, Twilight. You are a pony, and the pony amulets are perfectly safe, but you see why we cannot give them to the donkeys yet. But wouldn't it be better to warn them of the dangers, and let them help test the prototypes? She looked back up. As the non-pony amulets are rare, they tend to get lost in the mail, so to speak, and the black market is rife with them. Some are legitimate prototypes. Some are pony amulets with amateur spells applied. Some are merely rocks with a glitter finish. But none are safe to use by unwary buyers, and I do not wish to encourage their illicit trade. I see. I'm sorry for doubting you, Princess, but I suppose that I won't be here in the future long enough for it to really matter. Princess Celestia stepped off her throne, walked to Twilight's side, and wrapped her wing around the unicorn. Twilight, you need to stop thinking of this as the future. You are in the present. I appreciate your sentiment, but you must face the facts. You will never see your time again. None of us will. Instead of thinking about Equestria of the past, you should be thinking about the Equestria of the future. Centuries ahead from now, not from then. With your power and your knowledge, you can be very influential on how Equestria will look in another 350 years. You can do a great amount of good for ponykind if you set your mind to it. You cannot change the past, Twilight, but you can change the future. Twilight shuffled her wings beneath her robe, taking a moment to think. I understand what you mean, Princess, but I've sent plenty of letters to you about how wonderful it is to have my friends, and I don't intend to abandon them now. Princess Celestia turned away. Very well, Twilight Sparkle. Research what you wish, she said, walking back to her throne. Twilight paused, then brought her book back out and continued to read. Her hat tilted forward. The afternoon sun found Twilight Sparkle in the castle courtyard. She spread her wings and ran across the grass, flapping vigorously. She could feel her hoofsteps lightening. Her hind legs left the ground first, leaving her forelegs to take her remaining weight, efficiently shifting her centre of gravity to a position not at all conducive to flight. Twilight picked herself up and brushed the dirt off of her body. She smiled awkwardly at the gathered onlookers and waved them off. She steeled herself for the next attempt, pawing at the ground. She took a deep breath. Twilight broke into a sprint, concentrating on her wings, which flapped furiously. This time, she carefully balanced the load on her front and rear halves. Twilight Sparkle left the ground. She pulled into a steep ascent to clear the wall. A smack to her right hind leg signalled her failure to make it entirely over. Twilight sucked air in through gritted teeth. She started to turn her head to look, but she nearly lost her balance. Twilight moved her leg back and forth. Nothing felt broken. She could only hope that she didn't crack a hoof. At 2 attempts, this was her most successful takeoff to date. Tuesday had been just embarrassing, for instance. Twilight was sure that flying would be exhilarating if it wasn't so difficult. Soaring gracefully across Canterlot, Twilight looked out over the plain, spotting in the distance a multitude of coloured buildings. Ponyville sat on the edge of the Everfree, the only trees in sight, with thick black clouds obscuring the view of the forest's interior, as if to compensate for their lack of kin in the pony-controlled lands. From the air, Twilight could also see rows of long buildings and shimmering blue lines crisscrossing the town. She looked down, refreshing her mental map of Canterlot. She descended to her house at the edge of town and braced herself for the most difficult part of any flight. The lawn rose to meet the pony pulling out of a dive too late. Twilight smacked into the grass, rolled across the lawn, and impacted to the side of the house. Moments later, Sweetie Belle ran out. "What was... Twilight? Are you okay?" Twilight wavered in and out of awareness. Hey, Sweetie Belle, did you know that the average adult female Pegasus can hover for approximately 400 consecutive seconds while carrying a load of 20 kilograms? I should really learn how to do that. Twilight? Twilight braced her forehooves against the wall and pushed, releasing with a pop. She looked back at the lawn. Brown gouges marked her landing strip. She was sure they would grow back. Twilight looked at the wall. Her horn had left a narrow but deep indentation in it. She didn't think that would grow back. Twilight shook her head and got to 3 of her hooves. Rainbow Dash has a saying. Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. She took a few steps. Yep, that was a good landing. She rubbed a horn, which was still intact. So, what have you been up to today, Sweetie Belle? Sweetie turned slightly towards the house. Oh, you know, reading, books, more reading, more books, some more books, and some reading, since there's nothing else to do in there. Did you read anything interesting? Twilight smiled. Oh, yes. The books were simply fascinating. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. I can't wait to read some more. I was planning on taking the train to see Ponyville, but if you would rather... Sweetie Belle zipped in front of Twilight. No, no, no! I want to see Ponyville! Let's see Ponyville! She peered at Twilight's hind leg, which hovered slightly off the ground. But are you sure you'll be all right? Twilight shook the leg in question. This? I'm sure it'll feel better once I can sit down on the train. But what about the walk to the train station? Won't you? Twilight's horn lit up, and a wave of purple swept across the pair of unicorns. Twilight stood with Sweetie Belle on the platform, lightly loaded with saddlebags. She had had to make another trip back to get the train fare, but everything had worked out. The refreshingly familiar sound of a steam whistle echoed in the distance. Next train to Ponyville approaching on platform 2, the conductor called. Please stand back. The whistle sounded again, closer this time, and Twilight could see the locomotive coming around the curve. Strangely enough, the train looked just as she had remembered. Only a few rounded corners indicated that it hadn't travelled through time with Twilight. It wasn't until it approached the platform that Twilight noticed that the train did not have wheels. The rails on the ground looked the same. The train simply hovered above them with a faint magical glow. The train silently slid up to the platform. The conductor magically opened the doors, and ponies filed out of the train. All aboard to Ponyville, the conductor called. Twilight limped onto the train, Sweetie Belle beside her. Twilight situated herself down on one of the seats. She noticed that it was a lot softer than the seats that she remembered were. The train car tilted ever so slightly as it accelerated out of the station. Sweetie Belle stood with her forehoofs propped up on the window, watching the scenery go by. Twilight busied herself massaging her leg and inspecting the interior. It was very similar to the trains back in her time. She half limped up and down the car, more confident in her ability to walk. A minute later, Sweetie Belle piped up. Hey, we're almost at Ponyville. Sweetie Belle, it takes longer than this to get to Ponyville, Twilight replied. She turned towards the filly and opened her mouth to continue, but her words died in her throat. Outside, the landscape blurred past. The horizon rose as the train banked around a curve. Nearby shrubs flickered past outside the window before the train returned to level. It's amazing, Twilight. I've never gone this fast in my life. Sweetie's eyes were glued to the grass. The train began to decelerate. Next stop, Ponyville, the conductor shouted. Please make sure to take your belongings with you as you depart. Twilight looked out of the window at the long building passing by. It was white, with large windows showing a field of red, with the occasional green poking through. Before she could analyse it any closer, the train came to a stop, letting its passengers off. Twilight tested her weight on her hind leg. It still hurt, but seemed acceptable to walk on. She and Sweetie Belle exited the train. All aboard for Las Pegasus. The two unicorns left the train station. Twilight turned around to get a better look at the building she had seen earlier, the train gliding away in front of it. The red she had seen turned out to be floor-to-ceiling fruit. At the top of the building, in large blue letters, was the phrase, Sweet Apple Acres. The building next to it held oranges. The next, grapes. If her view from Canterlot was any indication, the entirety of the fields had become these magiponic farms. Twilight could only imagine the words that Applejack would have if she had seen those. Meanwhile, Sweetie Belle had wandered over to one of the blue lines, which turned out to be an aqueduct. Water rushed through the stone-lined ditch, and Sweetie hung on the railing at the edge. Twilight quickly hobbled over and pulled her down. I was just trying to get a better look, Sweetie Belle pouted. Below them, the artificial river brought water to the farm buildings. Curious, Twilight began to follow it towards its source, beckoning Sweetie Belle to come along. Twilight thought she knew Ponyville by heart. In the distance, to the right, should have been Sugar Cube Corner, but a furniture store stood there instead. As they walked, they passed where Carousel Boutique should have been. It was a sports equipment store now. Her library. Twilight had spent countless hours there, with her friends over for everything from slumber parties to organising the next seasonal change to saving the world. There were no more friends to have slumber parties with, no more seasons to change, and a world that did not need to be saved. Twilight Sparkle could not bear to look at where her home had once stood. Soon, the ponies reached the edge of the Everfree Forest. The air ahead was thick with magic. The aqueduct continued past the glowing haze and into the woods. An earth mare came up to them. "Can I help you there, Mrs. Twilight Sparkle? And my—" she suppressed a giggle. "Daughter, Sweetie Belle." "Riptide, Ponyville Waterworks. Is there something you needed?" "I'm sorry, I'm just—" it pained her to say it. "New to Ponyville. And I was curious about what all these channels are for." "They take the water out of the Everfree rainforest, of course. It rains there. We collect it and distribute it, primarily to Sweet Apple Acres. The remainder is magically injected into the aquifer." Sweetie looked up. "So, this is how all the grass gets watered?" "That's right." Riptide began to address the filly instead. Twilight was thankful to avoid the embarrassment of having to be lectured on how the basics of the world worked. "Although, most of our water goes to Sweet Apple Acres. The coastal cities provide most of the water to the rest of Equestria. They take the salt out of the ocean water first, of course." The mare winked. "Of course," Sweetie Belle winked back. "Has your mother shown you how to use the dowsing spell?" "No, I can't do magic yet." Sweetie turned away with an embarrassed flush. "Here, let me show you then." Riptide dug into her saddlebags, producing a purple amulet. She put it on, and the familiar translucent horn appeared on her head. She walked away from the aqueduct. "First, you get a sense for the water below." Her horn lit up. "Then you pull it up to the surface. There!" A jet of water squirted out of the ground at the panting mare's hooves. "It's a little tricky for us amulet users to get it, but you're a natural unicorn. It'll be a lot easier for you. You can douse anywhere in Equestria like that if you find yourself in need." "Wow, Twilight!" Sweetie Belle turned to her. "Isn't that great? I bet that's how they get the water up to Canterlot." "That's right." Twilight hoped that was right. "Thank you, Miss Riptide. This was very educational. For Sweetie Belle, I mean." She turned to leave, but she saw something that made her freeze in her tracks. She looked at a hill. Empty except for the grass, it looked like any other hill. But Twilight knew that hill. That was Fluttershy's hill, the one her house used to be on, the one her animals frolicked around, now bare. Twilight's friend would never sing there again. "Twilight," Sweetie Belle tugged at her foreleg. "I'm getting tired. Can we head back home?" Twilight looked down at the filly. "Yes, Sweetie Belle. We'll go home. I promise." The train glided back into Canterlot Grand Central Station as the sun sank below the horizon. Outside, Twilight was surprised to find Princess Celestia waiting for her. "Pardon my coming to meet you here, but I needed help with the national budget, and I heard that you had left the city. How was your trip?" Twilight bowed slightly. "It was a learning experience, Princess. Actually, on the way back, I got to wondering, is there such a thing as an Earth Pony amulet?" "They are certainly possible, Twilight, although there is little use in having one. They grant neither strength nor durability." "I know, Princess, but can you get me one? A combination of Earth and Pegasus amulet, if it's possible." "I shall see what I can do." Twilight, Sweetie, and the Princess walked out of the station. "Did you learn anything of interest in Ponyville, Twilight?" Celestia asked. Twilight stopped. Yes, Princess, I have. I learned that the town I visited was not Ponyville.